How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Real Talk. Today, I'd like to go over a question that's been discussed a lot in indie comics lately on some streams, EFAPs, on Twitter, of course, and that is, are indie comics overpriced? More specifically, $25 indie comics. Now, yeah, it could be fair to say that some indie comics might be overpriced, but that's dependent on many factors, which we'll get into that in a couple minutes here. My issue isn't with the fact that some folks want to charge less for a comic, whether that's $20, $15, or whatnot. My issue is with, some indie comic creators coming in and saying all of indie comics are overpriced, just generalizing the entire space versus saying, well, some might be overpriced, right? Because you could have a book that's made of AI art, right? Or free 3D assets, and that's $25 versus a book with a really high quality artist that has a pretty high page rate. You can't say they're on the same level. Yeah, you could say the one is overpriced, and there's probably a lot larger margins on printing that book versus the other, which is filled with real and high quality art. So, again, not every case is the same. So, I don't think it's right to just generalize an entire group of people, a group of creators. So, that's my biggest issue is not the fact that people want to charge less, some of these creators. By all means, go ahead and charge whatever price you're comfortable with. And go ahead and tell people, hey, I want to just be a lower cost option for backers. I want to increase the number of my backers. Economic times are tough, et cetera, et cetera. That's fine. What I'm not fine with, though, is stepping on the backs of others in order to prop yourself up. And this is a slimy marketing technique, in my opinion, where you're like, oh, well, these guys are all overpriced, but look, I'm not, so come back my book. Hey, all these guys in crowdfunding, they have late books, but I don't, so come back my book. I think that's just toxic in general for the indie community. We should be just trying to get as many people into the crowdfunding space to back our books versus saying, oh, well, the rest or all of these people are doing it wrong. I'm doing it right. I just don't think that's good for the community. That's going to cause division amongst not only creators, but also backers. So that's where I have the biggest issue is that not how people are actually pricing their book in terms of wanting to charge a lower amount. That's fine. Now, on the flip side, of course, I have an issue with someone charging 25 plus dollars for a book filled with AI art, right? Where they actually don't have the expenses to justify such a massive profit margin. Yeah, that's overcharging, in my opinion. But if you have someone that has a pretty decent page count, they're working with a really top tier artist in the space, they're paying several $100s a page to their artists. Well, yeah, there's justification there to charge $25 because you have to really you have to invest a lot of money to even get that in front of backers. The other issue I see is that, some folks just continuously compare indie comics to the mainstream. Now, sometimes it might be fair to compare the quality of the art or the story, right? Because there are indie comics that outshine some mainstream comics. But you cannot compare their price points. It's two completely different markets, two completely different structures. You have the mainstream where they have legacy marketing, legacy characters, they have connections, and they're in the film industry, TV, and they just have this massive amount of reach, right, and marketing power. And naturally, they have buying power, right? They're doing print runs of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of books. Of course, they're able to print at a much lower price. They're able to put leverage on their suppliers, negotiate for much lower prices. Indies do not have that. If you go to a printer and try to negotiate your pricing on a 50 print run or a 100 book print run, it ain't going to happen. Now, if you can say, oh, well, I'm going to print 100,000 books with you, I need you to come down 10%, good chance that'll happen because they want that volume, right? They can bake in their setup costs and all of that real easily. So it's not fair in that sense to compare mainstream to indie. They are completely different. The other thing is, right, the mainstream, it's a corporation. They're paying those artists directly. Those artists do not have to go and get funding for those pages to happen direct from the customers, right? They're all getting funded, initially and then going to the mass market. So it's completely different compared to an indie who has to invest right out the gate to get at least some cover art, some interior pages, a trailer, things of that nature before they can even do the Indiegogo or Kickstarter, crowdfunder, to then ask for support from the backers to then hopefully bring the project to life. Two completely different worlds. So to say, oh, well, a customer could go and buy, five mainstream comics for the price of one indie. Well, duh. That's basic economic common sense. It really is. That's where the crowdfunders need to explain to people this is why an indie comic is as expensive as it is. And then people that are new to backing crowdfunding, they will understand, like, oh yeah, no wonder a mainstream comic is so much cheaper. But it's really sad to see indie comic creators that know how expensive it is to create a comic and know how hard it is to create an indie comic, comparing us to the mainstream as a tactic to say, oh, everybody needs to bring down their price, or look, I'm at a lower price point than everyone else. Like, that's just not good for the indie space. We're supposed to be, in a sense, together because we're trying to fight the reduction in quality of the mainstream, the inability to enter the mainstream, all of those things, right? But again, whether it's intentional or not, it comes across as, hey, you're insulting the indie space and specifically indie creators if you're going around saying, hey, they're overcharging or overpricing their comics. Like, that's not good for the space. The other thing too is, I mean, here, let's break down into the $25 comic, right? Because that's been I guess, the price point that's been discussed the most. And I'm going to actually jump into a spreadsheet soon so I can actually show you examples of how these different costs can impact a creator's ability to break even. But here are some of the main reasons why not all $25 indie comics are the same. A, page count, right? If someone is doing a 5-page or 10-page comic and it's low quality art, yeah, it would be fair for folks to be like, yeah, that seems overpriced, because it's going to be very cheap to print, even at the low print runs, and you probably didn't pay much for each of those pages. Um, Versus, someone that's 36, 48 pages, they've paid several $100s per page in commissions. Makes sense why they could need to charge $25, especially if they want to continue making books in the future. The other thing is art quality, right? If book A is really low detail, minimal backgrounds, poor inking, poor coloring, versus a book with like a really good artist, right? Now let's go to an extreme because there are some extremely good artists in the indie space. Let's say, just for an example, there was a book out there with 24 pages of Dale Keown art. Is that worth $25? Yes, it is. He is one of the best artists out there. That is completely justifiable, especially considering the amount of time and effort he puts into each page. And even more so if it's someone that's commissioned that person, right? If they've commissioned Dale for all of that art. So, yes, that is going to be top tier art. And if there's the story there to match it, tons of people will pay $25. So, it is a fair price, especially if the market and thousands of backers are ready to buy it. But that could even be applicable to a mid-range artist, which I'll show here shortly. The other thing, which again ties right into the previous point, is the page rate, which in a lot of cases is tied to the quality. Some other aspects are print location, paper weight, lamination type, if there's even lamination, the cardstock or paper stock for the cover. Now, when I say print location, right, there are indies printing in China. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah, it might cut your printing costs in half or even more so. I haven't looked into it myself. I mean, I know in general, just from other aspects of my life, that yeah, you're going to get things cheaper if they're printed or made in China. But just because one creator is comfortable doing that doesn't mean they should be telling everyone else, hey, you should be able to come down to the same prices as me, when many of us would prefer to have it local in the States or even a local print shop so that you have that quality control. You're not worrying about, hey, what if the company screws you over, that you can have some sort of recourse, right? Legally, that probably won't be the case if you do it overseas, right? The printing. And you want to ensure the quality, that there's no risk of things getting damaged, being air freighted all over the place. So again, those things impact the cost of a comic, regardless of page count. The other aspect that backers and some creators need to consider is, you know, indie comics are not just a side hobby for every creator, right? For some, it's folks that used to work in the mainstream, got pushed out, and it's their livelihood. They survive off of creating comics. So they have to consider things like health insurance, mortgages, right? Being able to feed their family. So they have to make sure that they are making enough money to survive. And especially those folks that were in the mainstream, obviously they're higher level artists. So if someone were to be commissioning them, their page rate would be higher. Again, that goes into that cost of the comic, and that is completely justified in most cases. Whereas, someone like me, even though, yeah, it would be a dream to do this for a living, I don't survive off of this. I don't really consider it a hobby. It's more of a passion. I'm trying to grow within it. Um, but I don't. My family doesn't rely on it. It's a bonus for my family. And it's a bonus for me, um, from an like inspirational and just self fulfillment perspective. So that's something that varies from creator to creator. The other thing too is, artists shouldn't accept losing money or even breaking even just because some folks are pushing a narrative that indies need to drop their prices. Yes, inflation is real. The cost of almost everything increases year over year. Now, large corporations can combat that, right, with negotiating power, having leverage, modifying print runs. There's so many different ways that corporations can cut costs, right, outsourcing it to lower cost countries, things of that nature. We shouldn't be, in my opinion, indies shouldn't have to consider lowering their art quality, outsourcing their art, things of that nature, just to offset, said price increases. The fact that indies have been able to, in many cases, keep the price stable of their books, actually, to me, that's quite nice to the backers, right? Because the artists have higher expenses, right? All their equipment, their subscriptions to Adobe, to all the programs and things that they have, they've went up in cost, which means page rates in a lot of cases may have went up in costs. They're not passing that on to the backers. If you can keep your price stable, then you're doing a damn good thing for your backers. And that's quite honorable in my opinion. So I don't think you should be expected to, figuratively, lay on a sword just because the cost is going up for consumers. Well, you as a creator, you're a consumer as well, right? And everything that you're putting into this project, those costs are going up. If you can keep your price stable to your backers, that's awesome. The other thing too is you won't know if the price is a deterrence until you complete your campaign. Until you get feedback from your backers to know, hey, was the art up to snuff for the backers? Was the story up to snuff? Things of that nature. You know, it's trial and error. And, creators have to protect themselves. Financially, they have to try to make sure that they're not, sacrificing, money that's needed for their family, just to create a comic. And that's why we have crowdfunding, right? Is so that people can rally together to bring these projects to life. And yeah, over time, you might find ways to bring down costs, because it is a learning experience over time. You may get higher backer counts, which means you can do higher print runs, which means you may be able to scale down a little bit over time. But for new creators coming right in, it's a guessing game because you have no idea in most cases, are you going to have many backers? Even if you have quite a few signups, a lot of creators have no idea what their print size is going to be when they are setting up their pricing. So they do have to, you know, be conservative and play it safe in a lot of cases. Because again, they don't have that experience. Not every indie creator has an experience in like the corporate world. Like I've been fortunate in that sense to have experience in some of these aspects, where others might not. So there's got to be a little bit of a level of understanding of how difficult it is for new creators coming into the space, as well. So yeah, again, main issue that I have is again just the generalization that hey, all of indie creators are overcharging their backers or their products, their books are overpriced. I'm sure there are cases where you could look at certain aspects and say, yeah, I think this is overpriced. Like I said, AI art, things of that nature. That's fair for sure. But there are a lot of cases where folks might be undercharging, um, or they're just simply charging a fair price so that they can not only provide a great book to their backers, but that they can continue to create. If they don't fund enough, the train might stop there. They may not be able to continue to create. So, in order for them to continue to provide books to their backers, grow their number of readers, and bring great stories and entertainment to folks, they've got to survive financially. So, let's jump into the spreadsheet. Let's see here. Eh, There we go. All right. So I did just a simple example of a full color comic here with some examples of different batch size prices. So let's start off with kind of the baseline here. Full color comic, the size, just a standard US comic size, 80-pound text for the interior paper, right in the middle for the most part, 100-pound cover stock, staple binding, so not perfect bound or anything of that nature. Page count 36, so not low, not really high, kind of, again, middle ground. I did put soft touch lamination, which adds a bit of a cost, but again, some creators like myself, they want it to be premium, want it to be better than what the mainstream is providing. And then this, just like the page count, is variable here. That's why it's in yellow. So let's go into fixed costs. So this is just examples. Okay, this is not what I've paid on page rates. This is kind of, let's just say again, middle of the road, not real expensive, but not real cheap. So if I were to adjust these numbers, it's going to adjust the loss and profit numbers and the break even point. So we can play with that a little bit. But again, here are just some figures that I tossed onto here as a baseline. So line art plus inking. So assuming you have a line artist that can do both, $150 per page. You have coloring, $80 per page, lettering, $15 per page, and then $4 for editing. So here you can see the totals, which are just calculated, just page rate times page count here. As you can see, it's a little bit of a formula up there. So you add all these up, that's roughly a $9,000 investment by the creator, right? That's not chump change. That's nothing small. But that's only part of the money that needs to be funded for the crowdfunder. So again, there's more that goes into it. So then let's jump into the variable costs here. So obviously you have your print cost, and these are just some variable costs. There are others. It's going to depend on the products that you are doing as well. But let's say a Gemini mailer. And the assumption on this too is just one comic per backer and shipping in a single Gemini. Just keep it simple. Bags and boards, polybag and or foam. So let's say $1.25 for a mailer, 26 cents for bags and boards, which you can get on Amazon, 20 cents for polybag and or foam, and then freebies. Right, these are the stretch goals, the extras that you give folks. And I think part of, let's say, the failure of that narrative of, hey, folks that are charging $25 in general are overpricing is that in a lot of cases, you're not just getting a comic, right? You might be getting several laminated prints, laminated bookmarks, trading cards that are laminated and put in plastic sleeves or hard plastic cases, chibi stickers, you name it. This is again variable dependent on the creator, but you're not just getting the comic for $25. You're also getting all this other stuff too. And now you may not see that in the cost, but we, the creators, we feel that cost. We do have to pay it. So I just went with like $1.50. Let's assume a couple prints, sticker or two, right? A couple tchotchkes, and then tape, right? So this is a very variable cost, which is the print cost. So that's one here that we can change to impact the pricing. So for folks that may not be familiar with like batch size pricing, right? Obviously, the higher your print run size is, the cheaper your book will become to an extent. So these are just example print costs. You might be able to find them at higher prices at some places. You might find them at lower prices at some places. And of course, if you go overseas, they could be considerably cheaper. But this is just an example, but US, printed books. So I went with just some standard kind of lot or batch sizes, 50, 100, 250, etc. that you can see here. Then you have some other fixed costs like, creators have to pay for Adobe Suite in many cases, whether it's to work on trailers, thumbnails, layouts for your crowdfunding page, marketing material, you name it. But it's a real cost. And let's assume 6 months at like $60 a month. So that goes into the calculation as well. And then here's the funding portion of it. All right. So you obviously have the price of the book. So funding, or if we put it in normal business terms, we'll say revenue, right? So you have $25 for the book, the price, and then you have shipping. Now you'll see I put the shipping in the funding, and then I also put the shipping down here in the cost of goods sold. I'm assuming a 1-for-1, $8 the backer pays, $8 the creator pays, US Postal Service, for example. So it goes in, but it comes out. And I think that's a misconception that happens too, where folks are like, oh, this creator's raised $100,000, as if it's just like, poof, they've made $100,000. No, that's funding or revenue, but sometimes 20, 25, 30% of that is 1-for-1 shipping. So then that goes to maybe $75,000. And then you take into consideration, losing, let's say 5 to 7% to the crowdfunding platform and payment processing, right? So you're coming back down closer to 70,000, and then you have the cost to actually print. And then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So that number is not like this amazing, glorious number, even though it might seem like it in some cases. But when you look at the creators making 10, 20,000, right? You could understand where it's like, yeah, they're not just sitting on a pile of money, which is why in many cases they're not actually overpricing their books. So those two, prices there, revenue streams times the backers gives you the funding total. And then we go into cost of goods sold. So I kept it simple. I didn't put in the platform fees. So obviously this would actually be a little bit worse or harder to attain. But we have the variable costs, which are all of these costs here added up. So $771 plus the shipping of $8 times number of backers. There's your variable costs. So $8,000 in variable costs roughly. And then you have your fixed costs right up here plus the miscellaneous fixed costs. So about $17,000 and $17,807 if you had a print run of 540. So kind of got lost in the numbers here, just having fun with the spreadsheet. But in order to break even with this example, this specific type of comic, price point of $4.40 for printing, which is the 500 batch size there, you would need 540 backers to break even. You would need to raise $17,000 to break even. That's tough for a brand new creator with no reach, minimal following. And again, this is why you can't compare us to the mainstream. Mainstream has a ton of reach. The creators, the ones that are doing the inking, the stories, they don't actually have to do the marketing, right? The actual, DC Marvel, they're doing it, right, in full. So that's pretty daunting. Now, I'm not doing this to like scare creators or anything like that, right? And this is variable because if you reduce all of these, page rates here, right? Let's say the creator comes in, they want to, maybe be around 100 pages in total or $100 total for page rate, then yes, of course, you won't need to raise as much. But if you're kind of middle of the road in terms of the rates that you're going to incur, you gotta raise a substantial amount of money just to break even. And these days for new creators, that would be hard to raise that much money unless you have a really good artist, good connections, and you're busting your ass. So yeah, in this, specific scenario, $25 would not be overcharging unless you, again, knew you were going to get thousands of backers for some reason. Then you could scale it down, right? So let's say this person got really lucky, got 2,000 backers, all right? So you're, of course, going to adjust the price to print. That's pretty darn good, right? that would help them go right into producing the second book. But again, this is not going to be a normal situation. This is a rarity for a brand new creator that's new to the space, right? Or any, I guess, general indie creator, right? And the funding would have to be $66,000 in funding to get 2,000 backers. So that's a big project. So let's hold on here. All right, so go back to this. So let's play with a couple of the figures, right? For shits and giggles here. Let's say we go down to line art inking, $80. Coloring, you find someone to do it for $40. Lettering, you get a steal. It's $5, and let's say you have a friend do it for $1 a page. So in order to break even here, obviously here there's a profit, but again, 540 backers, that's a lot of backers for someone to get. Not super realistic, again, unless you're established with a large following, huge mailing list, previous backers, etc. So let's find the break-even point here. Let's go down to 200 backers. Not going to do it. I still haven't even adjusted the print cost. Let's go 300. And you can ignore this. This doesn't have calculations. That's just off of that initial 540 backer at the 440 price. So you can ignore this. So we're just going based off of this here for break even. So yeah, 300 backers, but that's going to put you in the 250 batch size pricing. So your pricing is going to go up to $5. So you can get a couple less backers. Middle of the road. 90. So roughly, 294, whatever, 295 backers. 294 backers at those very low page rates. And this is at $25. So now imagine you've got these low page rates, okay? You've only had to invest the $5,000. But again, as your backer count or batch size decreases, your variable costs increase. Now, if you drop your price, your margin between your per book revenue here and variable cost is just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, which means you'll need more and more backers to offset, again, all of your costs of goods sold. So let's go back to, let's just stay at this page rate, okay? Let's say we get low page rates across the board, okay? We're going to drop the price to $15. So that's what some people are saying. We got to get indie books down to $15 or lower, okay? And we're not going to change the page count. Let's just stay at 36 pages. Obviously, it's going to be easier if you get down to 24 pages, etc. So let's say $15. So at $25, you break even. 294 backers, you go down to $15. Boom, you're at a $3,000 loss. So you've got to increase your backer count. Let's see by how many backers you would have to increase it. Let's say roughly 200. Let's go to 500. Let's improve the batch size pricing. You still are in the hole by $1,200, right? Because your fixed costs are not going to change and your variable costs are not going to change just because you reduce the price of your book. Just the margin, right, between the book price plus shipping versus your variable costs. So let's go to 600. Okay, your batch size price is not going to change. You have not hit 750 yet. So even if you double your backers, you're still in the hole. So one of the, part of the narrative that some of these folks have been pushing is that, well, we're dropping the price to increase your backers. That's true. You might increase your backer count, but you might have to double your backers in order to break even. That's not an easy feat at all, especially if you're only talking a $5 variance or $10 variance. So yeah, in this specific example here, I mean, you're talking Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'd have to over double. Obviously, you have to get to 675 backers. That's a ton of backers. You know, a lot of indies come out with 100, even 50. If they're lucky, if they're new, they don't have a name, 200, 300, right? So this just highlights how difficult it is for a creator to not just break even, but make a profit. And that only gets harder as you drop your price. Unless, again, you have some big buying power, which again requires a lot of backers or knowledge of or intuition that you're going to have a bunch of backers in advance, which again, unless you're a big YouTuber, something of that nature, not very likely. So let's drop the page count. Let's see what that does. So let's go down to a 24-page floppy, which gets talked about a lot. Okay, you're suddenly in the green at those rates. That's 675 backers. So drop that down to 500. Yeah, and you're just over, the break even there. So yeah, imagine in this case, 100 backers. They lose $3,000. They couldn't even recover their fixed costs. So that's tough. Um, the thing is, in my opinion, it's important that folks try to put something like this together before they do a campaign, just so that they can get an understanding of how the price and all the costs will impact what you're doing and what you need to raise, so that you can set a reasonable funding goal, have reasonable expectations, all of that. Because yeah, putting together a comic is not cheap. It's not easy, and hopefully you can see from this example, right, that it's just really difficult. And I still had to update the price here to show you what would happen if they had 100 backers. In this economy, with the wages of folks, like taking a hit of $3,000 on your family is not it's not a small thing for most folks. Some might not have to worry about that, but I think the goal should be, for those that want to help others in the indie space, is to not just say, oh, you need to drop your price because you're going to grow backer counts. It's like, well, how do you get backers without losing money? How do you have a successful campaign? How do you get connected with great artists that have good, fair pricing? How do you get on more streams? How do you network? How do you find printers that are better quality at a lower price? That's the stuff that's the knowledge that new folks need when they come into the space. That's the knowledge that I obtained from watching tons of folks talk about indie comics, like Joe Sontag, Michael Bancroft, all these folks that are sharing that knowledge. And yeah, those streams or videos of folks, when they're sharing that knowledge, they don't get the clicks because it's not drama and all that stuff, but it is valuable. It helped me run a successful campaign. It helped me make a profit on my campaign. It's helping me now use that money to make a full-blown comic. But it was really, if I would have just went in blind and not learned these tricks and tips, would have been nasty. I don't know if I would have kept going. In terms of making a comic, it's different for the novels I made, but I still did a 15-page comic, and I used a high quality artist, and I did, a premium, comic in terms of the cover stock, the lamination, all of that. So I didn't spare expenses on that or the freebies or stretch goals. So yeah, that is a little fun exercise here um, with Excel here, just to show like, hey, it's not as simple as just drop your prices. Unless your costs have dropped. If you cut your inking and all your page rates in half or even lower, like, yeah, it might be easier. But I'm not a fan of that approach. If you have an initial campaign and lower page rates, let's say the art wasn't fantastic, and maybe that's why you didn't get the amount of backers you wanted to get at $25, instead of saying, well, if I just stay at that same quality of book and drop my price, well, I'll just triple or quadruple in backers. It's like, maybe you need to consider upping the game, right? Increase the quality of the art. That does mean paying more though, but it gives you more marketing power if you get a better or bigger name attached to your project, and you have this art that's your marketing material, right? your cover art, for example. And I didn't even put covers on here, right? I just basically assumed like one page is your cover, right? You had the same artist do it. But if you go for, a really good cover by a great artist, you got to add on maybe hundreds, if not 1,000 or whatever, to these fixed costs. So yeah, it's just not that simple of saying just drop your price, um, and that could be really bad advice for some folks. Obviously, there's some nuance to it and more details that need to be put into it. Of this is how you could drop your price, or this is the strategy. But again, I don't think across the board that you should just be saying all of indies are overpriced. Mainstream's cheaper and blah blah blah. It's not that simple at all, especially when you look at the math. It's way more complicated. Comics are not cheap, not only to make, but to print. And even for novel folks, um, they need to be aware of the editing costs, right? To have a good editor, the costs of a good cover artist, and again, do the same calculation. And if you're doing crowdfunding, the printing is not cheap either for novels. It's actually, in most cases, it's quite a bit more, obviously, than a comic because of the page count. You're talking hundreds of pages. So yeah, I want to see more folks spread tips and tricks, teach more things about batch size pricing. This is what your fixed cost might look like. This is what your variable cost might look like. Things of that nature to help folks. If anyone wants to reach out and wants a copy of like this template or something, by all means, I'll share it. It's not like financial advice. It's just an example of hey, this is how you can set something up just to see like where you need to land and what you might be able to afford to do. Um, Again, just to prepare yourself. So this is my way of not just trying to combat a narrative, but hopefully just give some insight, possibly help some folks, because there are folks that help me out, and I appreciate that. But also, there might be people that watch this or other videos that don't understand, that are potential backers, right? That may not understand all the costs that go into these comics. Well, this might help them understand, like, hey, wow, whew, it's not cheap for these creators to make these books. The $25 in many cases might be quite fair. In others, it may not be. But it varies. There's a lot of variables. And again, the quality of the art, the page rate, the page count, are you printing overseas or not? There's a lot of variables. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on are indie comics overpriced? Yes, they may seem expensive, but really they're not in a lot of cases. And I guess one comparative would be, let's say you have a local small farm, right, that gets meat or beef or cows or whatever butchered at a local butcher shop. They're going to have to charge a much higher cost per pound than a mass production farm or corporation, just because of volume, because their expenses, their buying power, it's the same exact thing. So yeah, if you go to a local butcher, you may pay twice as much for a steak or for beef in comparison to Walmart. It's the same thing here. So yeah, thanks for watching. Would really love to hear people's thoughts on this, where they stand, and I hope this was helpful, at least for some folks. So thank you. Please also check out my other videos, and also check out my books. I have 2 novels and a mini comic about a gargoyle and a team of vigilantes fighting terror in Detroit. I have 2 individual novels, both are on 250 pages each. Soft touch lamination, whole 9 yards, oversized books as well for novels. I have a massive duology version with this beautiful Joe Ball art here. So again, did not spare, or, I went all out on this project. I have a 15-page mini comic, again, with some amazing art by Corey Barton, Elliot Rodriguez, variant cover by Skunk Artworks. Again, that gives you some illustrations for all the characters, key information about them, depicting some of the major scenes. So yeah, please check it out and support indie comics, indie novels, and crowdfunding. And thank you, everybody, and God bless.